Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to Talk Like a Leader. This week's episode is titled The Danger of Assumptions. Now, assumptions can interfere with the communication process in two ways. One way is the assumptions we make about the meaning or intent of other people. And the other way is the assumptions other people make about our meaning or intent. So the first thing I'll consider is the assumptions that we make. And I'll start by telling a quick story about an experience of mine. I think I might have actually shared this in a prior podcast episode. It goes back to early in my marriage with my wife. Now, my wife, using the language of the DISC model, that's a communication style model we've talked about in various episodes in this podcast. My wife, Sandra, has a predominantly dominant style trait, or high D, or D style, in the language of DISC. That means that she has a very bottom line focus, very intense, very passionate, very outspoken, and that's not typically me. Now, early in our marriage, before I understood the DISC model or had taken much time to understand her very well, which is, I think, fairly common early in a marriage, I would interpret her intensity and passion about a topic to be angry about the topic. And because I would interpret her passion and intensity to be anger, I would respond as if she were angry with me. So I would withdraw or I would push back. Both responses would actually then make her angry. So I would wind up in the situation I didn't want to be in because of the assumption I made, not because of her emotional state, not because of her intention, not because of what she was thinking or feeling. I created anger in her because I perceived her or assumed that she was angry. And I assumed that she was angry because her body language, her tone, her pace was similar to the body language and tone and pace I would use if I were angry. And there's a whole host of reasons why we get in this situation. We won't go into all of that right now. I'll just say that I was assuming that she had the same intent or the same feeling or the same thought I would have if I behaved the way she was behaving. And I was wrong. So the lesson here is to, one, be aware that we can make assumptions about other people's state of mind, about their emotion, about their intent, about their meaning, that has nothing to do with their actual state of mind or feelings or intent or meaning. It becomes the story we've constructed in our head, not really the story they're trying to convey. Now, at the end of a communication, we hope we arrive at the point that the story or meaning or intent they're attempting to convey is the story or meaning or intent that we have in our mind, that we truly understand what they're saying, what they mean, what they're feeling. And we have to beware that early in a communication, early in a conversation, at the start, the first words, our reading of their body language and their tone and their pace and their word choice could be wrong. Now, I'm not saying that it's always wrong. I'm saying that we need to be aware that it could be wrong, and we need to remain curious and inquisitive and listening, making sure that we truly understand their intent or their feeling or their thought, rather than attaching our assumption to it. We have to learn how to separate the story we're telling ourselves about what they mean or how they feel from what they actually mean or feel. And dig, inquire, listen, seek understanding. Beware of assuming too quickly. I've come to the conclusion that I never truly know another person's intent or meaning until they explicitly tell me. Meaning that with my wife, for example, she's not angry until she tells me that her emotion is anger. Me interpreting that her emotion is anger is not sufficient. And I've just noticed that because of the emotional filters I have, because of my background, after 30 plus years of marriage, I still don't interpret her emotion 100% of the time correctly. Sometimes I do. I've gotten better over the years, and I still miss. So it's best not to assume anything, rather to inquire and listen and wait for them to explicitly tell you what they're thinking or feeling, and spend time in that conversation. Beware of the assumption you attach to what the other person means or feels or intends. Now, the opposite side of that is to recognize that people are also assuming things about you. They're reading your tone, your body language, your words, and they are assuming things about what you mean. And the danger here is that they will run on that assumption, whether it's accurate or not. So one of the things I've learned to do is to pay attention to how people misunderstand you. What kind of situations, what kind of word choices, what kind of tone or body language, what kind of situations are you in? When you find that others misunderstand you or make assumptions about your meaning or intent, or take a different meaning or intent out of the conversation than you had in mind, pay attention to that, and then learn how to anticipate it and head it off. Now, this will be different for every person because different people have different body language cues and different tonal inflections, different word choices, different situations you find yourself in. So my situational problems won't necessarily be yours. I'll just use mine as an example of how you can do this. One of the things I've noticed is that in team meetings, when people make suggestions or come up with ideas, my first thought tends to go in the direction of, how can we make sure this doesn't create a bigger problem for us? Now, my intent is to help us implement whatever idea is on the table in as smooth a way as possible with as few errors, omissions, mistakes in the process as possible. So my intent is to help, and my natural tendency, historically, not so much today, my natural tendency is to, basically point out the problems we could run into or the challenges the idea might create for us. Now remember, my intent is to help us avoid those challenges, not to shoot down the idea. What I've noticed, though, is that if I start with the problems I see or the challenges we'll have to confront, what people hear or interpret from my statement or my concern is that I don't believe in the idea, I'm trying to shoot it down, I'm negative, I don't want to do this, all I see are problems, and all of these are things that are actually not part of what's in my mind. Well, one of the strategies, there are many that depend on the situation and the depth of the relationship I have with the person or the history I have with the team. So exactly how I pull this off will vary based on the situation a great deal. The general context or general idea is that I will basically tell people that I'm about to do something that could be misinterpreted. And I want to clarify that misinterpretation before I proceed. So basically, I slow down a little bit and I declare my intent. It might sound something like this. I am totally on board with trying to find a way to make this idea work. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm saying that I'm on board with this. I want to find a way to implement this idea or to make it work. So I start with that. I'm totally on board with this. I like the idea. I think this has potential, something along those lines. And then follow that with, and there are some things that I'd like to address to make sure we can do this well. Or I might say something like this. The next piece of what I'm going to say might sound negative. I want to make sure everybody knows I don't mean it that way. So I'm going to try to find some way to let people know that I am raising concerns in the interest of helping, not in the interest of shooting down. I call it declaration of intent. Now, like I said, all of us will have different ways we do things that annoy other people or send messages that are misunderstood. All of us have our different tells or ways we do things or patterns of communication that create confusion or misunderstanding for people. So you'll have to figure out what yours are and then figure out a way to let people know that what you're about to do or the approach you're taking doesn't have the interpretation that you are aware people often misinterpret it to have. It's called declaration of intent. I want to remind you that assumptions are incredibly dangerous. They happen on both sides of communication. You make them. You need to be aware of them and learn how to separate your story or interpretation from what the other person actually meant so that you can drive towards common understanding. And be aware that there are things you do that are misinterpreted by others. Be aware of those and try to do something to head off the misunderstanding. Let people know that whatever it is you're doing isn't done for the intent that it's misinterpreted to mean. Declaration of intent. So beware of your own assumptions and learn how to head off misinterpretations or assumptions about your intent. If you can do that, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.